Hello, and welcome to this episode of Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah. And oh gosh, I can't even say this without starting to laugh. Okay.
Good start.
Apologies in advance for the really bad pun.
Hey, never apologize.
We are so deeply thrilled to have Connor Caplan, author of The Sword in the Street, Spiffbo semifinalist, and worm enthusiast, here with us to discuss Dune today.
I'm really excited to talk about a good worm. This is just the perfect sort of conversation for me.
Guaranteed, this podcast will have more worms than 90% of Dune adaptations.
Oh, I'm so ready. I love my beautiful wriggly son.
You're getting ahead of us, though. We have other stuff to talk about first, unless all of your answers for our intro questions are worms and worm-related activities. But first, what's something good that happened this week?
The new Wheel of Time trailer dropped today, and it looks amazing. I'm very excited for it. That's my good thing.
This wasn't technically this week. This was the end of last week, but for Self-Published Fantasy Blog Off, I made semifinals.
Woohoo!
Congratulations.
I'm really excited about it.
Well, that's much more impressive than mine, which is yesterday there was a really good rainbow.
That's lovely too.
It's been raining all week, but then the sunset came through and it was super bright. So first of all, it was very overcast, but very bright at the same time, which is a very fun weather pattern. And while I was driving home from work, there was just this bright ass rainbow almost directly over where my house was. It was very fun.
That sounds lovely.
Did you both get rainbows?
I don't know. Did we? Sarah, did you get a rainbow?
Yes, I did get a rainbow.
You sent me a rainbow the other day.
I did send you a rainbow picture. I got a rainbow on Monday. It was not quite so bright as yours sounds, Lily.
Mine was damn impressive. And they're so magical. I don't see them very often. It's not usually sunny enough for rainbows in Seattle.
It's not usually rainy enough for rainbows in California.
But sometimes everything aligns, and you just get those shiny, magnificent things. Anyway, that was probably more conversation than a rainbow needed. What is everyone drinking tonight?
I made myself a French 75, which is simple syrup, a tiny bit of simple syrup, lemon juice, gin, and champagne.
I am having a green tea because it is 10 p.m. where I am, and I have to stay up for this podcast.
Oh, you're a trooper. We're glad to have you with us. Plus, we also get silly, tired Connor, so that's going to be great.
It is going to be great.
I've forgotten how to talk already, so I'm sorry in advance.
You're in good company.
Tonight, I am drinking Chardonnay. Don't ask me anything about it. I do not know. But it was in my house and I'm drinking it.
As good a reason as any.
I agree. And of course, this is a book podcast. So, read anything good lately?
I read Miss Percy's Pocket Guide to the Care and Feeding of British Dragons by Quenby Olson. It came out yesterday, or our yesterday as we are recording, not the yesterday of you listening. And it was fantastic. I loved it. It was like Jane Austen meets a little bit of Terry Pratchett meets Diana Wynne Jones.
Sounds wonderful.
Yes.
It's really great. I read it a couple weeks ago. It's phenomenal. This week, I'm reading a book called The Old Love and the New by Alistair. Oh, God, I forgot how to pronounce his last name.
That's a weird last name.
Oh, no, we're in audio, aren't we? Ah, damn it.
Sorry, Alistair.
I think Alistair Kardec, I hope I'm getting that right. I'll probably get a tweet about it if I'm wrong.
It won't be the first thing mispronounced on this podcast.
Nor the last.
It's a really great book, though. It's like downright, oh God, it's like Shakespearean dialogue. Not like in terms of being in sort of Middle English or anything like that. It's just brilliantly subtle and just, oh God, it's so gorgeous. It's everything about it is just filed down to this really pristine point. The language is absolutely beautiful and I could gush about it forever.
Well, it sounds good.
I haven't pre-ordered it. I'm excited to read it.
Oh, it's so good.
Well, I just read Unreal Estate, which is a short story by Jenna Stober. It was cute. It was a little horror, a little more like psychological thriller.
You did text me to say that it was written in first person.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna bring that up. It was the exact kind of first person that I don't like, where the entire time reading it, I'm like, but why are you talking to me? Who are you talking to? So put a bit of a damper on it. But it was a good, just like little horror mystery. What's going on? Do we ever find out? Gotta read it. And it's short. It's like 14,000 words. So it's just a quick little spooky read. I am clinging desperately to Spooky Month, which it technically still is today.
Yeah.
You've got a couple more days left.
Yeah. All right. We've danced around the subject long enough. How come there are never enough worms in the Dune movies?
I think the movies should just be worms.
These movies are made by cowards is the reason.
It's the same issue I have with shark movies. Everyone knows we're here for the shark. Why is it not on screen more? And don't give me this, oh, monsters are scarier when you can't see them. No, I want to see the shark or the worm, which is possibly a sand shark, you could say.
You know, that's fantastic, and I love it.
Do you think you would count Dune as a shark movie then?
I need a spin-off movie that's just Jaws on Arrakis.
Right? Everyone knows the worms are the best part, but they're like 10% of the story. It's awful.
Right. I want a whole book with like the worms just front and center.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
well, there is a book where one of Paul's kids turns into a giant worm.
What?
Oh God, no, it's great. I've seen so much fan art of that.
That sounds amazing.
Wonderful.
Why don't they turn that into a movie?
I Google it in my free time.
Maybe if the new Dune is popular enough, we'll see adaptations of the following 4 books. And then you would get, Paul's kid as a worm and Duncan, Idaho just being revived and not allowed to die. That is a thing that happens.
Aren't there so many fucking clones of Duncan, Idaho in later books?
I think so. It's been a long, long time since I read anything but the first book.
So this is why I suggested we make this a spoiler episode. I don't think it's possible to talk about this and dance around. We all know what happens, right? And if not, you basically know what happens. It's Dune. There's worms. Yeah. Surprise.
Except there's not enough worms.
But not enough. It's true.
That's why we need everyone to watch this movie, is so that we can have more worm content until eventually we get to the one where a man becomes a worm. It's like a weird, horrid Pinocchio tale in which a man becomes a worm instead of a real boy.
Well, we did recently watch the 2021 adaptation of Dune, as might have been obvious by our conversation. But there have been a couple movies before this. There was the movie in 1984, and there was a mini-series in 2000 called Frank Herbert's Dune. There were probably others, but those were the ones that were easiest to find on the internet.
I think actually those are the only ones that have been made.
Really?
I think there have been a couple of other attempts to make Dune, or at least my understanding. I could be wrong.
So one of the biggest aspects of Dune, of course, is the spice, right? Everyone knows that line. The spice must flow. But one thing that Connor pointed out about this most recent adaptation is they don't actually explain why or what or how.
The other ones I feel like get into it at least a little bit more as to what the spice is and like why you need it and how critical it is to everything. And like I feel like this feels like the kind of thing where like they have so much exposition in the movie. I wouldn't be surprised if there was something along the production line where they wrote it in somewhere and they just kind of assumed it was always there and it just got lost because there's so much in here. It's a very dense movie.
We're also only seeing the first half. I mean, there's a whole second half of the story that they're going to tell, and it's possible that we'll get more of an explanation of spice there.
That's true, but we do already know. So the story starts with the Atreides family being sent to Arrakis, which Is Dune another word for Arrakis?
Yes.
Or is it just a description because it's a desert planet? Okay.
I feel like they use both to refer to the planet. I could be wrong.
I thought Dune referred to the planet, but it's definitely also
Yeah.
called Arrakis, so I don't know which
Yeah.
one. Anyway, and the reason why this planet is important is because it is the only place in the entire goddamn universe where you can find spice, which is a drug, but also the thing that allows space travel and all sorts of very, very critical things.
It's space cocaine.
It is, right? I
Yeah.
think in the earlier adaptations, the extent to which they explain it is by calling someone a spice addict. Like that's as far as they go, but at least that gives you some idea instead of
Yeah.
this 2021 version where I don't think they even do that. It's basically just unobtainium,
Yeah.
right? It's important, don't ask why.
I have to imagine they're saving it for the sequel. Where like we got to save some exposition for later or something like that.
What a crazy thing to like sleep on though.
They didn't get enough exposition in the first movie. We had to save some for the next one.
I guess. So as we mentioned, there are a few adaptations almost perfectly hitting that 20-year cadence. So that's fun. And of course, they all have different strengths and weaknesses, both as standalone movies and as adaptations of the book. I think it's very interesting how the first adaptation, the 84 movie, seems to cover much more of the series than the other two do.
Well, the 84 version is the entire book, whereas the miniseries covers the same content just over 3, hour and a half long episodes. And then the movie, the 2021 movie is going to be that content, or my understanding is that it's going to be that content, but split over 2 books. So we got the first half.
Movies, but yes.
Yes, movies.
So the 84 movie is trying to squish so much content into not that long of a movie. And it really feels like it.
with only moderate success.
You have like twice the length in the 2000 TV series, but I don't think it gets as deep into the lore.
I feel like the 84 movie does a lot of telling and not showing.
Yeah, that's how it gets so deep.
Yeah, you end up getting a lot from it, but that's just because there's a lot of voiceover. There is so much voiceover in that movie.
Faces on a screen just telling you. All of them have a lot of exposition, but that's just because, I mean, it's Dune. How are you going to do it without literally just force feeding some exposition?
Mm-hmm.
That's actually one of the things I loved about the 2021 version. A lot of the exposition, it was done very pointedly. Like, remember this, it's going to be very important later. But like, they at least made it naturalistic. Mm-hmm. Like it was part of some larger scene and people were actually having human reactions to the exposition. It wasn't just dumped in your lap.
It was much more conversational, right? Like it fit in the scene and wasn't just a voiceover.
Yeah, you'd get like, there's the scene with someone showing Jessica a Chris knife, I think, at some point. And like previous versions of that scene, if I'm remembering correctly, would just sort of like pause to have like, I think Mapes or something would be the one who'd be like, this is the Chris knife, this is what it means, here's what it is. Okay, you got it? Okay, movie's resuming.
It does feel like, yeah, it would just pause every once in a while to catch you up. But at the same time, I feel like I had the worst grip on what was going on in the 84 movie. That one was sort of just a psychedelic fever dream where you don't really understand what's happening, but that's fine. You'll get to the next scene.
There were also a lot of wild choices that Lynch made. Like, why does Gurney have a pug? I don't know.
Well, why not?
I liked it.
It makes for a better movie.
It does make for a better movie. I enjoyed the pug, but is it true to the book and does it make sense? No.
I think the biggest flaw, I mean, there are many flaws about the 1984 one. What am I saying? Like, one of the things it does is it gives you so much exposition and then it does not tell you what parts of it are important or what you should prioritize in your brain, you know? Mm-hmm. It's like, give them everything. They'll figure it out.
I think in a way, though, it's been my favorite of the 3. I don't think it's a good adaptation. I don't think it's a good movie, but I've enjoyed it the most because it's so out there and so ridiculous that I can just laugh at it.
I've had multiple people who have asked me what Dune content to start with, and there have been so many times where I've answered like, start with like the 1984 movie. It's terrible, and I wholeheartedly recommend it.
But that's such a different watching experience.
Yeah, I think it's the easiest step in the onboarding process. Like if you can tolerate that, then you're gonna want to be like, what the fuck were they adapting? Like, then you go to the book,
It almost feels lighthearted in that way. Like it doesn't matter if you understand it. And so when you don't follow something, it's not stressful, or stressful is not the right word, but it doesn't matter because it really doesn't matter.
This isn't happening in a good movie.
Yeah. So Paul is the main character, theoretically.
Asterisk.
Yeah, I would argue, well, okay, I have not read the whole first book, so maybe I should just keep my opinions to myself. He's really not in it very much, though. He's more of the center of the story, with which other characters have actual plots and actions and feelings around.
I think you get a lot of his inner turmoil in the latter half of the book, where he's so desperately trying, because, he can, when he takes Spice, he can see all of these possible futures, and he's so desperately trying to avoid the future where the Fremen go on a religious crusade and essentially like overrun the rest of the universe. And you can see how he's trying to work towards a future that doesn't include that, and how that motivates all of his actions. So you do get more of him. I don't think that particular aspect of his character has shown up very well in any of the screen adaptations.
Despite how Paul-centric the 84 movie is, you don't get any of that shit.
You literally that's the only movie where you get access to his thoughts, and it doesn't get into that.
No, that was something that kind of blew my mind when we got to this year's movie, and then the book also backs it up. So Paul is hailed by the Fremen, who are the native population of Dune, as their messiah, and the first two adaptations lean so hard into that. There's no question about it. He's absolutely like the savior, and yes, there's all sorts of connotations to that as well.
Yeah.
But then it turns out that was completely manufactured by this one sort of political sect, the Bene Gesserit, who did that purely so they would have a foothold on Dune should they ever need one.
Yeah, they planted the prophecy, I think, thousands of years earlier and everything, right?
Yeah, which is very cool and so much more interesting than, oh yeah, God said so.
Yeah. It's a little more nuanced there. A little more interesting.
And it makes Paul a much more interesting character. And so the fact that the 84 version focuses on him so much but leaves the coolest part out is like, it makes it so much less dimensional.
Yeah, it's a lot more just sort of not paint by numbers. You couldn't call anything about the 1984 movie paint by numbers. It's almost like it's focusing its attention in just the weirdest sort of places. It's like, we got to go with a standard story here, because everything else about this is going to be just the ballsiest choices possible. And so we don't want to distract you from the more complicated things going on in the story, just because we're doing so much.
Well, and there's also that time constraint too. Like, what is the story that we can tell in the amount of time that we have for this movie?
Yeah.
I really feel like the 84 adaptation went for more of an experience than telling a story.
Yeah. It's like the kind of thing you would see when you drink the water of life.
That is a great description of it. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
However, when we move on to the miniseries from 2000, but then I think even more so in this year's adaptation, and then somehow the book did an even better job. Not somehow, they have so much more time, they being the books.
Yeah.
All of the, I don't even want to call them side characters, because they are like what is driving the story.
I think Dune is very much, it's almost like Foundation in a sense, but with more of a science fantasy sort of flair in that like it's sociologically driven storytelling where it's less about one person's inner journey and more about like a world full of people trying to achieve a sociological goal. And so the focus isn't on one person, it's on like the progression of an entire culture.
Absolutely. I agree completely. But you need to see those other characters for that to happen.
Yeah.
And they don't even feel like they all have names in some of the early adaptations.
Oh god, the 2000s miniseries, you had Gurney Howard shows up at the end of, in the third episode, I think. I have a distinct memory of that moment happens on screen. This guy's wandering into the Fremen camp or something like that. And I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? When did he get here? What happened? I fully forgot that this guy was even in. He had like 2 minutes of screen time at the end of like the first episode, and I forgot that he was around. That I think is where the 2000s one struggles the most. It's so Paul-centric for so much time that you almost lose the other characters around him if they're not literally in his immediate periphery.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. The one thing, well, no, I won't even say it does Jessica better. Jessica gets a really hard time in both of the first two adaptations as a character.
Yeah.
I think what it does better is it gets Irulan.
Is that how you pronounce it? I was chickening out.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing it up for me.
I don't know if that's how it's pronounced. It's how I'm pronouncing it. I'm happy to be proven wrong or told that I'm wrong. But she gets so much more time and character development than she gets in the 1984 version, or even in the book. Like you see her character a little bit in the book through the snippets of her writing that you get at the beginning of every chapter, but you don't actually see her as a character at all until the very, very end. And then all you get is her agreeing to marry Paul.
Right. Yeah. But she's great in the miniseries. I think that was a great inclusion. And what a female character.
She's also got some of the best hats in that series. In a series chock full of like fantastic hats, she has the most outlandish and the best ones.
The costuming in the 2000s miniseries was great.
It had no fear and I loved it. That was my favorite part about it.
The backdrop's not so good, but the costuming A+.
Yeah. The whole budget was spent on the costuming department. Like I will give so much positive feedback to the costuming department and nothing else about that movie.
Well, and they decided to include Princess Irulan, which I think was definitely a change from the book, seeing so much of her. Mm-hmm. But I think it was for the better, at least for that adaptation. It needed her desperately.
It was nice to see a female character with agency and with lines.
Then I start reading the book, and it turns out Jessica is great. The movies just did her dirty.
Yeah, the book actually. I mean, I guess this isn't really a surprise, given that the book is usually better than the adaptation.
I think we're getting into an eras discussion, though, because the book was written in 1965.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not usually a surprise, but here it is a little bit because the book was written in 1965, and you don't expect to find that nuanced a discussion or that nuanced a writing of female characters. You don't get that nuance in some of the other characters, but
you really don't expect as time marches forward, there's this agency degradation the further along you get. And then like in 2021, they just they finally flipped the narrative and everything.
Yeah, I would say if Princess Irulan is the best part of the 2000s miniseries, Jessica and the Bene Gesserit are impeccable.
Oh God, yeah.
They're great.
In this year's movie.
Yeah.
Sure.
Like A+, 100%.
I think I was saying this earlier. The thing I really enjoyed about the Bene Gesserit in the 2021 version is that like the previous attempts to do the Bene Gesserit is just sort of like starting with the book. It's like Frank Herbert is saying like these women are fucked up, but like they're no more fucked up than any of the men in this book. You know, they're all a bunch of political power players, and they're all making some extremely fucked up decisions along the way.
And this one just happens to be a group of ladies. That's not why they're fucked up.
Yeah, that's not why. And then like with previous movies, you've got like women making shady decisions, but the only language they seem to have for those shady decisions is what if they're evil? And that's the only way they can think to portray them. Whereas this one is just like, Yeah, they're allowed to get into more layered sort of like versions, and a lot of it was down to like the character acting and everything. I think like there were a lot of small choices made, especially with the Reverend Mother and Jessica. That one scene where like they're getting pissed at each other and everything, but it's just like you can tell it's like they're advancing political goals and they have different ideas about how they're going to do it, and various sort of like personal relationships that get in the way of that or advance that. And it's like, man, I wish we had that for the other adaptations, you know, like where was that?
That scene blew me away. They did such a good job.
Yeah.
The other adaptations that the Bene Gesserit are really like the caricature of witches. They don't have any depth to them. They don't have anything beyond, like you said, oh, they're just evil.
And they're scheming women getting into other people's business, which is also like a whole stereotype, right? They're just meddling.
Oh god, every other version of the Gom Jabbar scene, it's like it's almost like she's hunched over and sneering, you know, in all the other versions. And this one is just sort of like the Gom Jabbar scene in the 2021 version was just like, it actually felt like a test and not like time to torture this young innocent boy. Like, you know, it wasn't mustache twirling. It was just, well, let's see what the fuck do you think you're made out of, you know?
I agree completely. I also love that you actually see the Reverend Mother and Jessica, who is Paul's mother, they actually struggle with it.
Yeah.
The Reverend Mother, I don't get the sense that she wanted him to fail, which I think it absolutely comes out in the other two adaptations. Like, she's trying to destroy him.
She kind of does want him to fail just a little bit in the book. She talks about how if this had been a woman who was sticking her hand in the box, she never would have let the pain go that far.
Sure, but she criticizes herself for that.
True.
She's saying, "Oh, like I didn't handle myself well there," right? So it's in a negative context that she was doing this.
Even then, that's a layer of complication that's like really cool to see, you know? Like,
well, I don't think that you get that layer of complexity even with the 2021 version. Like, I think the 2021 version does her better, but there are still layers that are left unplumbed, you know?
I mean, at least she wasn't totally evil, though. Like,
I do miss her ring Gom Jabbar, though. Was that from the 1984 version? I thought that looked cooler than the needle.
I think it was.
I think the needle is more book accurate.
Oh, well.
But I liked the ring better.
Yeah, I'm seeing what you're saying with the whole idea of like how is the book that came out in the 60s the one that did it best, you know?
Yeah, she actually feels like a real person and not just an evil witch, right?
Yeah.
And then especially with Jessica, who knows that she's going to be putting her son through this trial that's not going to be pleasant for him. In this movie, we actually see her struggle with that. Yeah, she's scared for him, which feels so much more realistic. Right? In every other sense, she's supposed to be a caring mother, but she's totally fine with him maybe dying. Like, no.
In the previous versions, did they even cut away to her at any point?
I don't think so.
No, she wasn't involved hardly at all.
I really love the way they did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where it's like the intercutting between Paul and Jessica, like using that to build the tension. That was really good considering like how much of the latter half of that movie is dependent on their relationship and their connection that they built in that first half.
Mm-hmm.
That was really good. That was really cool to see and really good to just have out there, you know?
I agree, but this scene was actually one of the ones that I had the most, I don't know if I want to say questions about, because I thought that from the point of view of someone who hadn't read the books or seen any of the previous movies, I felt that it would be one of the more confusing scenes in the movie because there's so little explanation about what's going on, why it's important, what's happening to Paul's hand. Like, why does it matter?
I can
see that. Yeah. A lot of this movie, I think, is not kind to you if you don't know anything about Dune.
Yeah. So I think it works for people who have read the books or are familiar with the story, but I'm not sure how well it works as an introduction to Dune for people who haven't read the books.
I don't know if we're the right audience to decide that.
No, we're not, because
we're pretty familiar with it.
We've all watched the adaptations. We've read at least some of the books.
I can see it being kind of confusing. I really, as much as I'm gushing about how well it's done, and I'm trying to think, like, I know it's difficult to judge how well they did all this just because we're so familiar with it. I'm trying to think, like,
yeah, it was just, I watched
did they describe what was going on in that? All they said was, like, there's pain in the box.
Do they have to, though? It's a trial.
It was just, but that's not really explained either that much. Like, it was just one of those scenes where I watched and I was like, I like it, but would I like it so much if I didn't know what was going on? I don't think so.
I don't know what my answer would be there.
I feel like the 2021 movie does sacrifice some lore and world building in favor of developing the characters more.
Yeah, I was going to say that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, I was going to praise it for that. I will always judge in favor of the character development.
I agree, but I think that you still have to keep those bits of world building and lore that explain what's going on in the plot.
I don't think they're disconnected, is the thing. Like, if you don't have a solid footing on what's going on in the scene, you sacrifice some of the complexity you could have with the character.
Yeah.
Like, I think you could have done the Reverend Mother with the complexity that you get in the book. They get close here, to their credit, to getting like that level of complexity. But I think the reason they didn't quite get there was because a lot of the stakes in the world building there were not quite clear if you weren't already familiar with it. And so I think there's a sort of like symbiotic relationship going on there where, like, you want to try and find that balance, but if you're not getting into like what's going on and how that's influencing these people's decisions, you can get better characterization, but the degree to which you can improve on it is somewhat sacrificed.
I agree. I think there's maybe still room for improvement on that scene in 20 years when we get the next throw at this.
Yeah, the 2040.
But I feel like the way the scene is presented in this adaptation, you're right, we don't know all of the like world arching consequences, but we do know that Jessica is putting her son into a shitty situation that she doesn't feel good about, but is definitely not going to back down from. And this is also the first time Paul is dealing with effectively his grandmother, right? I mean, not in the familial sense, but the woman who raised Jessica. And so I think you do get sort of those tensions and the interpersonal conflict, even if you don't know exactly what the purpose of the trial is.
The why of it is unclear, and that sacrifices a bit of depth to the scene, but like all the elements that are going on are still going to be there.
Yeah.
And like anything is going to be a step up from what we had in 2000 and in 1984, you know?
You mean you don't like the voiceovers of, could he be the man that can do what no woman can do?
Oh my god, that adaptation, it was like they wanted to make it an anime, but they didn't, but they couldn't actually animate it.
Oh,
they had a little anime voiceover.
They were trying to stay really true to what the book does, because the book kind of gives us that voiceover.
Yeah, except
didn't work.
They tried to stay true to the book, except for any of the shades of gray involved, which would be what the book actually does really well.
Well, they cut out a lot. They just pared it down.
Even still, just discussing the Gom Jabbar scene with the Reverend Mother, like, we get all of the voiceovers, but she still ends up sounding like an evil godmother. We can literally hear her thoughts, and they didn't pull the thoughts out of the book. They just gave her like creepy, horrible ones instead.
It's like the Wicked Witch of the West sort of thoughts going on in there.
Yeah. Something else that doesn't show up in the adaptations at all are the company. So there are a couple of different political players on the world stage. There's the emperor and the noble class, the lords and everything. There's the Bene Gesserit, who are, they do call them witches, but it doesn't feel like a mean thing in the book. They just kind of have psychic powers.
I feel like they're a semi-religious order.
I think so.
Like calling someone a monk almost.
Yeah. So there's the Bene Gesserit, who's the female psychic users. Then there is also the company, or CHOAM, which does commerce. I'm not that far in the book, and they don't show up in the adaptations at all, so I don't know anything about them.
I think they're like space merchants, like the cabbage guy from Last Airbender, but a company and in space.
And also extremely important. No one wants to upset CHOAM.
Yeah, that part's not like the cabbage guy.
No one wants to upset the Space Guild.
Right. Maybe I'm just referring to that one line where the Reverend Mother says there are 3 political players, the Emperor, CHOAM, and the Guild. Maybe CHOAM is not actually that important, but she thinks it is.
I mean, I think that CHOAM is important in the sense that all of the political maneuvering that Baron Harkonnen does is to advance his status within the company and ultimately to take over the throne of the Emperor. But he's mostly focused at this point on moving within CHOAM. But they're not, as an entity, they don't really factor in, I don't think.
I feel like CHOAM is just a way of formalizing how money equals power. Right?
Yeah.
Within CHOAM, if you can basically buy titles. I think it's implied that's how Harkonnen got their house title, right? They just made enough money that they were recognized as lords. Maybe not Harkonnen.
I think that it's more the Emperor can give directorships, and directorship and the percentage that you own of CHOAM is a mark of status. And if you own more of CHOAM, if you're richer, then you're higher up in the social hierarchy.
I feel like it's implied you could get a title from it, but maybe not. It does just formalize that money equals power, right? That's all they're around to do.
I think it was to add like almost blend feudalism and capitalism into like a sort of governmental structure. I feel like there were a lot of parallels. It's been a while since I read the books, but I think that was sort of part of what he was getting at with a lot of that.
I believe it.
Mm-hmm.
When we do get to Arrakis, one of the things that gets hammered into the reader is that the House Atreides wants to treat their employees well, whereas Harkonnen just wanted to exploit everyone. And it is said with almost that precision.
House Harkonnen are kind of for a book that does so well to stay away from strict black and white characters, House Harkonnen loses a lot of that nuance.
And in very uncomfortable ways.
and in very uncomfortable ways.
Before we shit talk House Harkonnen, though, I did want to talk about the Guild, because they are cool, or at least the concept of them is cool. You don't see them too much, but they're the only people capable of deep space travel, or any space travel.
I think that the Space and Guild navigators are the only ones who are able to navigate travel in space,
like interplanetary travel.
I think. which is only because of the spice they consume,
right? Which
allows them to see the future, that lets them plot the spaceship course.
Space navigation is wild. It's one of the fun parts of sci-fi, or one of the funnest parts of sci-fi. And having just a guild of navigators having power because they're able to do this is very neat. Although it's true, all of that does just come from the spice. So there is the power, really.
And that's kind of the question of the book. That is a main thrust of Paul's success ultimately, is because he controls the spice, so he controls the guild.
Yep.
Oh yeah, wasn't that, I can't remember which adaptation had that, but wasn't there something about he who controls the spice controls the universe or something like that?
That's definitely a line.
I think that's basically a quote verbatim from the book.
It's like you can physically control it, but it's like a metaphor as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And there's also false scarcity. We find out that especially House Harkonnen, but some of the other houses have been stockpiling spice to sort of control the flow of it, if you excuse the phrase. And using that to manipulate or galactic politics, which is, interesting.
I think that's a really neat aspect that gets kind of, I don't want to say overlooked, but maybe falls a little bit to the wayside in the adaptations, just because there's a limited amount of time for the story.
The 2021 version, I think, got into it at least a little bit with like Atreides getting to Arrakis and then finding out like, oh god, everything's busted. Oh no. Like it sort of got into some of that, but like much like everything else, like the book kind of has more room to get into all of that, like with all the characterization and world building stuff.
It's just wild because that feels like the whole fucking point of the book. Whereas you get, especially the 84 adaptation, where the point was, look at Paul. Isn't he doing cool stuff?
Well, we might see more of Spice and the role it plays in intergalactic politics in the second half of the modern movie.
That's true. We are comparing like only half, if even that, of the story to two, I'm going to say two complete stories, although it could be argued.
Air quotes.
Yeah, exactly.
two completed adaptations, whether they're complete stories or not, is a different question.
2 movies that exist.
Right? I bet if we were comparing this year's adaptation with the first episode of the 2000 miniseries,
oh god, it will blow it out of the water.
Well, right, our understanding of the world building would be very differently skewed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, what the hell is up with Harkonnen, though?
Can we talk about? I mean, there's a lot of phobias that are expressed in House Harkonnen.
Well, can we talk about how you mentioned it? That's like the most black and white part, right? House Harkonnen, bad. How do we know that? They're exploitative, they're fat, and they're gay.
Yes.
Frank Herbert, what are you doing?
Oh god, there's some real uncomfy interviews he's done on Harkonnen being gay.
Yikes.
Yeah, I would believe that.
For someone who's critiquing, like, has so many salient points of power structures that he's critiquing, it doesn't seem to occur to him that like having these signifiers that these guys are evil by including so many traits that are stigmatized by those same power structures, like, is kind of just, it's almost defeating his own point a little bit.
It's counterproductive.
Yeah. Like, I don't think I would have had, I mean, I would have had a problem with like a lot of the gay stuff and the way he handles it, no matter what. But like, if he had more people like who are gay and or fat in the books, you know, it would have been at least a little better. Yeah,
part of the
this
issue
is the only one.
Yeah, part of the issue is that the Baron is the only one. I will say that I was really disappointed with the Baron in the new adaptation because they cast Stellan Skarsgård, who's a great actor, but he's not fat, and they put him in a fat suit. And I feel like if they're going to keep the fat aspect of the Baron, which, well, I'm not generally an advocate for removing fat characters from movies, but given that the fat character was a villain, I feel like it would be okay to just remove that aspect of him if you want Stellan Skarsgård.
I feel like they were just trying to balance the fans who would go, that's not what the Duke is supposed to be like. Yeah, because the book spends so much time explaining his gravity harness.
They could have, if they wanted to keep that aspect of him, which is fine, they could have hired an actually fat actor to play him.
I thought you were going to argue that they should have made other characters fat, so it's not just the evil guy.
Well, I think they should have done that too, but
I think that would have gone farther.
They didn't have Thufir, but like even then, like he was barely in it. But like, if you can, like, was it Kynes who they cast as a black woman?
Yes, yeah. And I loved her. I will say that she was fantastic. That was one of my favorite changes that the movie made. Like she was amazing.
So like if you're gonna like shake it up with like Kynes, I feel like you could do it with like the villains as well, like turning some shit up, you know?
Mm-hmm. I just if you're gonna keep the one fat character, at least cast a fat actor.
Yeah. They're trying to have it both ways almost, where like they want to keep like the fatness, but they want Stellan Skarsgård. Like which one you gotta pick.
Oh, they did some really cool stuff with the harness though, with him floating above the table and the way his robes went all the way to the floor. That was cool.
Does that count as a worm sort of thing? It's like worm imagery almost.
It was kind of worm imagery. I didn't think about that. But the way that he loomed and his body went all the way to the ground. Or
Yeah.
The robes, yeah.
the robes,
Yeah.
the illusion of his body.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that was
Yeah.
really cool. I'm not saying that they did anything else good about him, but that was a cool moment.
He wasn't in the movie a whole lot either. He didn't have a lot of screen time, which is probably good because what usually gets on screen for him is not great.
Yeah.
Considering how the past ones did.
They did completely cut, or at least so far, he has not been revealed to be gay in the 21 version.
Or a pedophile.
Or
Yeah.
a pedophile.
Ooh.
I wonder if Herbert was trying to go for pedophilia, but then didn't realize that those are different things, which is also a problem.
Yeah.
But a slightly different one.
I think I remember one time watching an interview with Herbert, and someone asked him why, like literally bringing up all the points that we were talking about with him being gay and why that's a problem now. And I think his response was something along the lines of, this was like, I was just trying to vibe and listen to an interview at the time, and then out of nowhere, Herbert sort of flips the script and is just sort of like, they don't contribute to the population. What happened, sir?
I think that I recall, maybe I'm wrong, but I recall reading an article about Dune and this issue of homophobia in it. And I think Frank Herbert had a son, not Brian Herbert, who has continued writing for the series, but another son who was gay, I believe, and kind of semi-estranged from his family because of it.
Well, I can't blame him for that. I suspect that's not the direction it went, but yeah, I don't know if I would want to be his son either.
No,
I'm Googling it, and it seems like it's true.
Yeah.
This Bruce Calvin Herbert, apparently.
Poor guy.
Yeah. Frank was unable to accept his son being... This is coming from Reddit, so I don't actually know how true it is.
Well, I feel like I read it on a reputable site.
Yeah.
So if it's being corroborated on Reddit.
Yeah.
They should just make Paul bi. Problem solved.
I mean,
in the 2000s version, there was a very homoerotic fight scene with two men in their underwear.
There are a couple of homoerotic fight scenes in the 2000 version.
They just need to commit.
So much of that movie was like, since most of the important characters were men, and they were the ones getting all the priority for the like emotional engagement with Paul, there were so many scenes where you just have like a female character get like dismissed abruptly so that two men could be like, you mean everything to me. There will never be another. And it's like, it was 2000. I see why that would go over your head as to what that would look like. But like, how do you not notice like what, like the subtext going on there, you know?
Counterpoint, they did notice and they intended it.
You know?
Maybe they were playing a game of chicken with the producers. How far can we go before they call us out on it?
You know, I wouldn't be surprised. Like TV shows have been doing that sort of thing for a while.
I feel like it's a possibility, not to be dismissed out of hand.
Considering we've been talking about this for an hour and haven't even brought up Cheney, the love interests in this book, or at least in these adaptations, excuse me, not
the book.
Yeah, I didn't want to speak for it because I haven't even gotten to her yet.
In that respect, I think they're fairly true to the book. She is the love of his life, at least in, book one.
But because his vision said so. Like, do they actually interact that much at all? On screen or on page?
Well, on page they do. I feel like this is a question of kind of chicken and egg. What came first? Do they have a relationship because he thought that he was having visions of her, or because he was having visions of her, do they have a relationship?
I'm okay with that tension. But
they do have interactions on the page. I do get the sense that he genuinely cares for her.
Well, that's something at least. I don't think we see that in the early adaptations.
No, I don't think so. He's also 15 when they meet. And I think that he's, at the end of the book, he might be as old as 19. And they have a dead son. And then they have more kids in later books. But
I guess I'm okay with the chicken and egg relationship that you were describing. But in the adaptations, they meet for the first time.
And he falls madly in love with her.
They have the one scene that he's seen in his dreams, and then they're just in love, and that's it. That's all we get.
I do feel like the 2021 one, you can't necessarily, it's difficult to compare because she's only in it in like the last scene.
Yeah, I don't think we can judge that yet.
The first two, like, it devoted upwards of at least the 1984 movie has at least half the movie is like up to the point where like House Atreides falls, and then the first third of the TV series is like House Atreides falls, and it's like, I remember strapping in for the TV series, like, okay, so they're gonna have more time out in the desert. They can do something with this, and then they just didn't.
Yeah,
they didn't develop anything, and it was still the same sort of like the narrative just sort of like didn't pay any attention to her unless it was she was being catty with Jessica, you know?
Yeah, I do know that.
That was the only time they could highlight her. And it was like,
I do think that she gets a little bit of a short shift in the books because you don't see the development of the relationship. Like, you see them together enough to feel that they do have one once they're already together, but you don't actually see any of that getting together process. So it does feel in that respect like something is missing. Maybe Frank Herbert just wasn't great at writing, people falling in love. I think he's decent at writing people being in love.
I do like Jessica's relationship with Duke Leto. In the 2021 version, this year's version, I saved that halfway through, but it still sounded funny. And then also even more complex in the book. But this year's movie was the first time I actually felt like she cared for him at all. Or maybe this is the first time she had a chance to express that on screen, which makes her not shirking of the Bene Gesserit, her defiance of the Bene Gesserit makes so much more sense.
Yeah, I've made this joke a couple of times, but like her like shirking the Bene Gesserit, like, if you're gonna do it for anyone, you can do it for Oscar Isaac, you know?
Yeah.
that coupled with the fact that they actually like built a relationship there actually makes it mean something, whereas like the previous two versions were just sort of like, oh yeah, I'll betray him, I'll betray my order for a man.
Yeah, she's just a woman. You can't count on those.
It's
I do wish that in all of the versions, but particularly I think in the 2021 version, because the relationship is so much more developed, I do wish that we saw more of the tension between her and Thufir Hawat, who thinks that she is the traitor. And I wish that we saw that play out, because you would have, this perspective of, well, she's so in love with Duke Leto, how could she be the traitor? Versus Thufir's insistence that she's actually just faking it. And I think that would have been fascinating to see on screen.
I agree 100%. The reader knows she's not, though, because
the reader knows,
because the little chapter headers tell you.
And Duke Leto knows.
Which good for him. And I believe they trust each other, and that's beautiful.
Yeah, although he pretends that he doesn't know, because he doesn't think that she's going to be able to act well enough. And that's could they have avoided some of these issues if they had just talked it out? Maybe. Isn't
that the moral of every story?
No, basically.
I mean, if you put Leto and like Harkonnen in the same room and had them try and talk it out, I don't know if that would have gone well. I don't know if it's always a solution. Then again, they don't have a romantic relationship, so maybe I'm just talking out of my ass.
It's a different kind of conflict. I do just want to say Sting was in the 84 version, so there's that.
So was Patrick Stewart.
Yeah.
And a pug.
The true star of the show.
Patrick Stewart carrying a pug.
They didn't have anybody in a Speedo in this new movie. And I think that's...
Yet. Hold out hope.
They had a whole Jason Momoa. They didn't do anything with it.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like they kind of didn't take advantage of that, huh?
They dropped the ball on that.
You gotta take advantage of your Jason Momoas.
This was the first adaptation I learned Duncan Idaho's name. I might be a little biased.
You know? No, I get it.
I think this is actually the first adaptation where Duncan Idaho stood out as a character.
I'm trying to
Yeah.
tell if that's just me being gross or if that's because the adaptation actually did something with the character.
I think it's genuinely because the adaptation did something with the character.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a little bit of it being gross, but
He had like a whole just sort of like death scene with dramatic music and people pounding on the door and everything. Like it was like a whole event, a spectacle and everything. Like that didn't happen in the other ones. So like I can see why that coupled with being Jason Momoa, you know, like of course he's gonna stick in your head a little better.
I think in the 84 movie, we do get like half a line about how Duncan went to the planet first to try to ingratiate himself with the locals. But that's it. I think that's all we see.
I can't remember him in the 1984 version at all.
Yeah, I can't even think of like what he looks like.
Oh, I can't picture that. I just remember that conversation. It was like literally 2 lines. That was it. Even the fight training was with Gurney because they had Patrick Stewart.
That was with Gurney in this version as well.
I mean, because that's the book. Like that scene takes place with Gurney in the book.
And
they did it with Josh Brolin in this one. He did. He had a previous interaction about dreams. I think
in the book they talk about Duncan training him to fight. I guess we don't actually see it. They just imply that he did at one point.
Yeah, I mean, he has trained Paul, but the particular fight scene that we see in the movies, and in all of the adaptations, is with Gurney and has always been with Gurney.
All right, I take it back. I mean, I don't, but that was not a criticism. Never mind.
I really like how they did shields in this in the 2021 one. I mean, no one likes how they did it in the 84
Now you think that. Yeah, but do you remember what they looked like in 84? Because that was pretty good.
You didn't like those blocky, blocky bits of pixels?
Like video game characters of the era, just an unintelligible mass of pixels. It's just, and then with this one, the thing I like about this one was like, if the shield is successfully working, you get like this blue light, and if you get through the shield, there's like a little red light, and you know that the person has gotten through the shield. Mm-hmm. That was a really good like it was such like a simple way of illustrating what was going on in really fast-paced scenes, and I just really like that.
I mean, the graphics in this one and the visuals were all fantastic.
Oh yeah, the imagery really, oh god, everything about the visuals in this scene really blended this sort of like this feudalistic imagery with the sort of sci-fi flair and everything. Oh god, that was really cool.
Yeah, like I think that this 2021 movie was a beautiful movie. I think it was a really good adaptation. I'm less sure if it stands up as a movie, like by itself.
I'm not going to argue with you, but I am going to add the caveat that neither do the other ones.
Oh no, I'm not saying that the others are great movies as a whole either.
I just think if you don't include that, it sounds like you're saying it did less of a job.
It did worse compared to like that.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, no, that's not what I mean at all.
That's fine. I won't argue then, but I am going to include that.
I do
statement.
think like for something as dense as Dune is, I think it's hard to make a movie that would stand on its own. There's some degree of winking at the camera that you have to do a little bit.
I'm trying to compare it to Lord of the Rings in my head, not the stories, but as far as introducing people to a whole world and having Fellowship of the Ring stand on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they could have done that if they had 3 hours, maybe.
Yeah, is that it? Just Fellowship? Well, I don't think Fellowship.
I mean, because the original, not the extended version of Fellowship.
Yeah, I don't think it was longer.
A comparable length, I would think.
Oh no, the original version of Fellowship, I grew up on that version. I only saw the extended edition when I was like a teenager.
It's 10 minutes shorter than Dune.
Yeah, so I think that...
But it's an easier world to introduce. Really? The theatrical version, yes.
Of Lord of the Rings.
Oh, am I? No. Maybe they're the same. Hold on. How long is Dune? Yeah, well, 2 hours and 35 minutes versus 178 minutes is a frustrating conversion. How
This is the
many
theatrical
hours?
version of Fellowship was 2 hours and 58 minutes. So
Okay, so we had a 20-minute difference.
178
that feels
minutes
so weird.
is 2.9 hours.
That's so weird to me because, like, for some reason, like, watching Dune versus Fellowship feels a lot longer. Does that make sense?
I agree. I think Fellowship feels longer.
So it is a little bit longer.
Yeah. It feels like more than 20 minutes in my head. And so actually seeing that is like, huh.
Yeah, it's 23 minutes. So pretty damn close.
Yeah.
I wonder how much of it is just that Lord of the Rings didn't have to do as much world building, heavy lifting. I feel like Middle Earth is more familiar to people than Dune is. And just as far as like, we can fill in the fantasy blanks, you know?
I think the thing that sets Dune apart and makes it more dense is it's getting into like complicated shit like politics and economics and like feudal political alliances and colonization and everything and exploitation and everything. And it's getting really into the weeds on all of these already really complex topics. Comparatively, Lord of the Rings is dense in a different kind of way. That's a lot easier to convert, to the screen, which, I mean, it was called unfilmable before they did it, but like.
I think Lord of the Rings is very linguistically dense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Agreed.
It's dense in this very mythologically heavy kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you're not getting the Rivendell currency, you know?
Yeah. I would argue that Lord of the Rings does address some sociological issues, but in a much more abstract way. Dune is actually trying to introduce the political systems, whereas Lord of the Rings is like, look at this bad guy exploiting nature. That sure does suck, doesn't it?
It's like, if you don't understand the line of succession in Lothlorien or something like that, like, your experience of the movie is not gonna be like, oh god, what the hell is going on here? Like, what? How does this work?
Gondor gets a little complicated. Anyway, we're not talking about Lord of the Rings. I'll stop.
We should have a Lord of the Rings episode at some point, though.
I agree. I just wanted to use those movies as an example of, you know, there are 3 different movies, right, that were released one at a time, the way Dune is being released one at a time. And so how does that world building sort of compare?
I was trying to make that compare. I mean, I didn't actually say anything, but I was trying to make that comparison too.
Now's your chance.
No, I didn't have anything.
It's both of these properties were deemed unfilmable.
Yeah.
Before someone actually managed to film it in a coherent way. And they also had multiple failed attempts in various iterations as well. There are a lot of parallels in like the process of getting it to the screen. And so it is a very easy sort of comparison to make when you're looking to compare notes.
Mm-hmm.
And I also do think I do think Middle Earth is just easier to explain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or at least to a point where you can access the plot of the movie. Whereas Dune needs a lot more backstory.
Yeah.
I did Google how long Dune is in minutes, and the first result is fans are outraged that Zendaya is in Dune for only 7 minutes.
Is it only 7 minutes?
I don't know. That's what the New York Post says. Also the Los Angeles Times.
I think she gets I heard who was talking. I listened to the Hour Pod episode on Dune, and they were saying that she was the 4th highest paid actress, and she, just shows up for a couple of days filming and then leaves. Good for her.
Yeah.
Also,
the character comes later. That's fine.
Yeah, she'll be in the second movie. Yeah. I'm inclined to like her because she's from Oakland, so she's a local person.
I know nothing about her.
I can only tell you that because someone else said that she was from the Bay Area. And I was like, oh.
I
Good
believe
for
you.
her.
I don't think I would have minded if the movie cut away to her a little bit more, you know? Like
That would have been cool.
that, yeah, like if they like went over, if they like left to go just sort of like build out the Fremen, like you don't even need a lot. You only got to cut to the Fremen like a couple of times for like a couple minutes.
Okay.
We could have followed Duncan Idaho there. That would have been cool.
Yeah, just so you know who these people are when you get there, so that like you don't get to Javier Bardem at the end of the movie. You're like, oh, that's the guy from way back. Who is this again? Like,
Can we talk a little bit about how I really didn't like Javier Bardem's casting? I think he's a fine actor. I don't think he was right for the choice of Stilgar. I think that for a series that draws so heavily on Islam, they should have cast a Middle Eastern actor for Stilgar.
I can see that.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue.
Yeah. He was so not my image of Stilgar. Again, he's a fine actor. I just don't think that he was right for this particular role.
Maybe they were
Yeah.
trying to avoid the direct comparison between Fremen and the Middle East.
But can you
Yeah.
really avoid it when it's so prevalent?
Maybe it's more in the book later, but
But a whole bunch of their religious quotations are from the Quran.
okay, well, I haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
even their names, or even like the titles they give people and everything. Well, even thinking about that, there's like the Padishah Emperor and everything. Herbert's borrowing from a lot of non-white cultures.
Yeah.
And that's a whole conversation there in and of itself.
There was a really interesting article on Tor actually about how the author of the article, who is Muslim, really felt that Herbert did a good job of taking Muslim influences and incorporating them into Dune. I can't speak for everyone's experience, but it was a perspective that I hadn't considered because Herbert's a white man. And I think the default assumption is that white dudes don't do a great job at incorporating other.
Where would you get an idea like that?
I can't speak to the cultural notes, but the Fremen definitely aren't painted in a bad light.
No.
Right? They're generally considered good guys, at least, again, the adaptations that I've seen and the parts of the book I've read. We're not going to talk about a universe conquering crusade. But I could see the adapters, the writers or the casters, not wanting to make a mistake. And so avoiding it entirely.
I see what you're saying. I think that in this case, avoiding it entirely is making a mistake. It's just a different kind of mistake.
Sure. I can't speak for them. I don't know.
Yeah.
Hire someone from Salt and Sage to like advise on it or something, you know?
Yeah.
Get a sensitivity reader in there and everything. Make sure if you're going to do it right, you know?
Yeah. I just feel like they kind of dropped the ball here. I mean, defer to actually Middle Eastern people. I'm a white woman.
Yeah.
You know, listen to other people before me. But
I'm going to be a component of even small change is better than no change. And this adaptation did better than the previous ones.
It wasn't just a bunch of white people, so there is that.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong there.
But like, let's not pat ourselves on the back, sort of thing, too early.
Yeah, I think
great job, everybody. We did great.
It improved on the versions that came ahead quite a lot. I think it still has room for improvement itself.
Like a lot of the movie, you know?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's sort of been our refrain through the whole thing, right? So much better. Still could get that just like oomph. There could be a little more oomph.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have a lot of good opportunities to expand on that with the second one.
Yeah.
Because it is going to expand so much on the Fremen. And so like they and since they didn't film it all at once, they have this opportunity to really nail it. Because the Fremen are only there for those 7 minutes. So maybe circling back.
And we only see 2 of them.
It's a good idea they didn't cut to them throughout this first movie.
We saw 3 technically.
Okay, so we saw 3 faces. Maybe they're all Middle Eastern. We don't know yet.
Well, but I think that speaking to your point, Connor, of them not filming at the same time, like they have a great opportunity to take some of the criticism that maybe they've been getting, or I don't know if they're looking at any of the criticism.
Yeah.
But they have an opportunity to listen to what people are saying and maybe incorporate those changes into the second movie. And I hope they do.
Yeah.
And I hope the second movie takes what this first movie did and improves on it.
Yeah.
But they should only listen to the correct criticism, like ours.
Well, you know that they're all, Dennis Villeneuve is listening to our podcast. Definitely.
He should be.
He's going to be the next guest, right?
Yes.
We'll send him an email. We'll get him on the docket. So, Sarah, you've read a little bit farther into Dune than I have, and you sent a very uncomfortable text.
I actually did finish rereading the first book in time for this podcast recording. I probably didn't need to, but we had talked about rereading the book. So I was like, okay, I'll reread the book.
I tried.
I didn't.
Well, to be fair, Connor, you were a last-minute invitation to the recording.
Yeah, I read very slowly. It would have taken me like a month anyway.
At least you've read it before.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah.
But as I was reading, I came across a couple of examples of a word that is being used correctly but makes me think of something else. And I posted them in our Fiction Fans Discord server.
That's true. I shouldn't have lied and said it was a text. I should have plugged our Discord.
Yes, you should have plugged our Discord.
It technically does involve text from a
That's
certain
true.
point of view.
It's our top secret Fiction Fans chat room.
We will link it in the show notes so you can join if you want
better
to.
hope this episode doesn't leak.
And so it comes up more than just these two times, but the particular texts that I sent were Paul crouched at the sphincter and sand rasped as he opened the sphincter. And sphincter, yes, it just refers to a muscle surrounding and able to contract or close a bodily opening, but it also makes me think of butts, which made the usage of it to refer to the opening of a tent a little unfortunate.
Yeah, that sure is a mental image, huh?
Yeah.
It's just, I mean...
What's going on with that sphincter? Why is there so much sand in there?
Paul, why are you opening it? Buy a drink first.
It's not wrong, but
I didn't realize that this was referring to tents because you sent it completely without context, which is the best way to read those lines. I assumed it was referring to the worms because their mouths also do look like butts a little bit.
Yeah,
a little bit. I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
And so I
it's all the teeth just sort of going inward and everything.
Yeah, that's the picture perfect image, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it does out of context, and I sent it without any context intentionally, but out of context, it does kind of look like I'm reading really bad erotica.
Or really good erotica, depending on what you're into.
That's true.
Oh, no.
Anyway, that's my words are weird for this episode. Sphincters.
I bet there's an erotica out there that includes the phrase crouched at the sphincter.
Well, there is now.
I'll put it in my next book.
I expect to see it in A Trim Reckoning.
Yes, absolutely. There's going to be, I will have at least one use of the word sphincter in a non-butt context.
I'm going to hold you to this.
Oh, absolutely.
It's funny, too, because butts aren't even the only sphincter, right?
Yeah, I mean, it literally just means a muscle that contracts and closes a bodily opening.
Yeah, there's also one in your esophagus.
Yeah.
I just wanted to confirm that.
Now, does it have to be bodily? Because if this is a tent, now I'm worried what that tent is made out of.
It is specifically a group of muscles.
The Merriam-Webster definition included bodily opening.
Which is also a phrase.
All right, Paul, what's in the tent? What are you doing there?
But I feel like this is,
Got some questions.
The tents are a new life form on Arrakis.
I mean, this is a case of poetic language gone wrong, right? It was just supposed to be a fun, there's even a word for using human language to describe non-human things, which,
Personification?
thank you. Hey. Saving me a Google. And that's fine. Personify tents, but not with sphincters, please.
Yeah.
Is that so much to ask?
You could just use the word mouth. Why is that so difficult?
Hey, good point.
I feel like because there's such a preoccupation with moisture in Dune, mouth doesn't have the connotations of closed to the elements that
Now
Sphincter
counterpoint.
does.
I do have a counterpoint. Are butts known for being especially sandy or dry?
No, but that's because of the sphincter. It keeps the sand out.
Yes, which is the point.
I do remember, I think it was in the 2000s miniseries, they do show the tent opening being like a drawstring, right? I am making a lot of awful hand gestures during this conversation, and I'm sorry.
No.
I do, right? We actually see like the mouth of the tent, the door to the tent isn't a zipper. The sphincter of the
The
tent.
flap. No, that's worse. Don't do that
It's
one.
worse.
Oh, I hate that one.
It's not the classic like zipper dome that we think of, right? It really is like a drawstring that goes down into a tiny sphincter.
Oh, no.
And I assume that is supposed to be some sort of sci-fi sand repelling strategy. I'm guessing that the tents are described in extreme detail earlier, and he thinks he can go get away with shorthand, but not like that.
I don't actually think that the tents are described in that much detail. We do know that they have some sort of like water collectors so that any kind of moisture that you give off in the night, you don't just lose.
Well, maybe the adaptation just took the descriptor of sphincter and ran with it.
It could have.
They had
Yeah.
like a tent department, like, all right, what does this mean?
I feel like maybe that was just an Easter egg for people who've read the book and can go, I get it.
Oh, that's what they were doing there. That's what Herbert meant. I got it now. It's like, does the Balrog have wings? But like for Dune.
Mhm.
Does the tent have a sphincter?
Can we beat this dead horse any farther? How many times can we use the word sphincter?
I'll have to sphincter about it.
Oh no.
Sorry, not sorry.
Yep. I don't think there's any more sphincter jokes we can do. I think we have filled them up.
Oh no.
There's a blockage. So, Connor, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Fiction Fans. Can you tell us where you can be found on the internet, and B, a little bit about your current projects?
Yeah, you can usually find me on Twitter at the CM Caplan. I also have a couple other platforms, but I'm never on there. So if you are looking to reach me, do not look there. As far as my current projects go, I have a massive chunk book that I am working on called The Trim Reckoning. It's a science fantasy about quadruplet royals having a succession crisis. There are these weird cyborg horses and just lots of petty drama.
Also, a great ironic pun if it's a chunky book, but it's called The Trim Reckoning.
I was trying to find a Shakespeare quote that nobody had used yet, and I went for a very narrow cast, but I think I got there.
It's a good title.
A narrow cast for a chunky book.
Oh, there's going to be so many jokes about that. It's going to be the next, like, sort of people take the sword in the street and do the blank in the sheets.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's the one people are going to be running with this next book.
That's true. Your current book, The Sword in the Street, is out now, which people can find probably also at a link in our description. And it is a Spiffbo. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Spiffbo.
Finalist.
Which,
So
Spiffbo being the self-published fantasy blog off that's run every year.
That's a smooth transition you guys had there.
being a semi-finalist is pretty impressive.
I don't know how to respond to compliments, but thank you, I think.
You're extremely welcome. And you're so welcome that we're going to move on and not make you squirm.
Thank you.
But before we move on, you also can listen to our episode where we talk about The Sword in the Street with Connor. If you haven't already, we did discuss it.
I don't know what number it is off the top of my head, but it's in there somewhere.
I don't either. I think it was a bonus episode, so I don't think it actually has a number, technically.
Keep scrolling, you'll find it.
We'll link to that
It's in
too.
there somewhere.
Yeah. And thank you for listening to this very wormy episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram at fictionfanspod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your worms always be defeated.
That was Connor's line!
No,
Was Connor actually going to say it?
I
I
thought
was
so.
not going to say it.
Okay, fine. I take
I
it
was
back.
just following along.
That was your cue.
I didn't see anything.
All right, pretend I didn't interrupt. We'll see if this stays in.
Okay. May your worms always be defeated.
Bye.
Bye.